One of the more fascinating things about ancient history is that all of these ancient cultures back in the day, they all talk about a time when the world essentially flipped over. They talk about a time to where the sun would rise in the west and set in the east. Now, I don't care who you are, that concept sounds ridiculous when you hear it, because we have not known a time to where the sun, rises in the west and sets in the east in our lifetime, and nobody in the past few hundred years has known of that either, right? It's not just people today who would look at this concept and think it's ridiculous. Even people hundreds of years ago, even maybe 1,000+ years ago, would have thought the concept was, weird. It was different. It was, is wacky. The ancestors, they are probably smoking something. They found some sort of cool drug. They took it, and now the sun is suddenly rising in the west. Right? That's what we're, the concept is crazy, because as we know cosmology and science today, to have something like that go down would definitely be, it'd be insane. And regardless of whether you're into cosmology or not, or you're into any kind of physics or anything like that, even your average person who doesn't care about any of that stuff immediately would know and understand that the sun rising in the west would be one hell of an impossibility. And if it did happen, it would probably be insanely destructive. Because to get the sun to rise in the west, something major has to happen either to Earth or the solar system in general, right? I mean, you have to flip Earth. Earth has got to go through some insane stuff to get the sun to rise in the west. So when we look back at ancient cultures, we have to ask the question, why do they all talk about the sun rising in the west? What the hell is going on? I mean, they all do it. American Indians, Mayans, Egyptians, Sumerians, Chinese, all of these ancient cultures, they all talk about a certain period of time to where their ancestors experienced the sun rising in the west. Now, if you're about to turn this off because you think the concept is ridiculous and not based in science, that's completely false, and I would say stick with me. If for no other reason, the fact that all of our ancestors are willing to make this claim, it's worth looking into, because why would they do it, right? I mean, unless they were all on the exact same drug during the exact same period of time in Earth's history, why would they claim that the sun is rising in the west? Right? And it's not only that just the sun rises in the west, it's a bunch of other stuff that happens as well that also aids in the corroboration of this story. Because as you read everybody's histories, which I'm just going to go into a little bit here, this is like a 12 million hour show. We're just going to go into the basics. But not only do all of these cultures experience a time where suddenly the sun is rising in the west, they also record all the exact same catastrophic events that happen because of this event. So if we're going to look at this situation using our critical thinking skills, right? We always want to employ critical thinking whenever we approach a subject, especially in history. If we look at all of these different stories, we have to admit that one of the data points that pops out is that everybody is talking about similar events around the exact same time period. And this is across the entire planet. Don't forget that. This is not just like one little area to where, oh yeah, maybe some of these guys shared some stories and that's why it happened, or whatever crap you can make up, right? This is a global situation. So if you're still embedded in the mainstream mentality of people being separated and diffusion not being a thing, and by the way, I'm not saying diffusion is a thing. I'm not convinced that, especially during this period of time, diffusion existed. I don't think that was going on. The reality is, for everybody to have the exact same experience on Earth, it had to have been a global event. So if we have people making the claim that the sun is rising in the west and everybody on the planet is doing that, we have to take that seriously, because that means everybody was witnessing the same exact thing. Now, this begs the question, of course, well, why? Why? How? I mean, okay, fine. Everybody has the same stories, basically the same story. You're going to find everybody, especially nowadays, because we've had a couple thousand years for myths to kind of take over and it be told and retold, etc. the concept of the sun rising in the west and setting of the east is pretty much plainly there in everybody's story. Of course, you're going to get all the different flavors of the different cultures' mythologies as you read and go over their histories. Now, that's going to cause confusion, and that's all right. That's fine. Whatever. That's going to happen. But the main points that we just want to focus on here will be the sun rising in the west and setting in the east. How many more times can I say rising in the west and setting in the east? I can do this forever. All right, I'll stop saying that. You get the point. The sun rose in the west. So what I want to start with here is I've been reading some Dwardu Cardona, and this is his second book called, what is it called? Godstar? Flare Star. It's called Flare Star. All right, now Dwardu Cardona is in that kind of electric universe sort of area, but this dude is also very heavily still entrapped in the Ice Age situation. He's an older boomer kind of guy. I don't say that like negatively. He's got that mentality, right? He's got all that social, psychological programming in him that says the Ice Age is real. It had to be real, blah, blah, blah. Even though, we have more than enough evidence to push that aside. That's a different show. Anyway, but Dwardu Cardona does go over some of the bullet points of how it's possible that the Earth could have flipped over and that we would have had the situation where the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. He also discusses some Velikovsky, and these people are not the only people that approach this problem. He'll go over some other people that approach the problem, and what I'll read here is that we'll be able to see several different viewpoints, so that for those of you who are highly skeptical, which is perfect, stay skeptical, you're going to get a few different viewpoints that attack the different angles so that you can make a more informed decision, applying your critical thinking skills. This is what we want to see. So while I don't agree with Dwardu's, Cardona's, I don't agree with his summation of this, I don't think. There's some very interesting points in here, and I want to read this to you guys. All right, let's get on with it. This section is titled The Tippy Top Model. Velikovsky's scenario received something of a questionable boost in 1978 when Peter Warlow attempted to provide it with a viable mechanism. To produce an ice age is quite simple, he wrote. You merely tilt the Earth a little bit. If, for example, we were to tilt the Earth by about 20 or 30 degrees so that the rotational pole was moved from its present position to a point in the Davis Strait, just south of Baffin Bay, we would produce the sudden readvance of the inner ice sheet over North America. It would alter the ice cover in Northern Europe by a smaller amount. It would produce a sudden change of climate in some parts of the world and not in others. The changes would be both to warmer and colder states, depending on the particular location. While this, according to Warlow, would have incurred changes in sea levels, there would not necessarily have been any change in the total quality of ice in the poles, quantity of ice at the poles. This would be because all that would have happened in Velikovsky's case would have been a mere displacement of the Earth's polar caps. Note, in fact, the similarity of his reasoning to that of Velikovsky's are reproduced above. A circle drawn with the pole in the Davis Strait as center passes through North America just below the Great Lakes. It passes through Europe in the region of the British Isles, and it just skirts the modern edge of Asia. As more than one investigator has pointed out, that is almost the extent of the last glaciation. Now, one of the reasons why they're starting out with the Ice Age situation here, and why Dwardu's stuck on it, is because one of the main areas on Earth that we do find the possibility of some sort of an ice sheet is in the North American area, like the whole Canada all the way down to, I think it's a little past the Great Lakes as well. That was not an ice age. That was one of Earth's original North Poles. That's very important to understand. Just like we have Antarctica right now in the South Pole, covered in ice, right? You have tons of that stuff down there. Just imagine that in the North, but in the North America, Canadian area, right? That was an original North Pole. So what these guys are trying to figure out is they're trying to figure out how you could get Earth to wobble and move back and forth, right? If you have heavy ice somewhere, maybe that would cause the Earth to flip over. That's kind of what they're trying to approach. Now remember, we're just going, there's various different approaches to this. These guys right now are trying to use some sort of an ice age to prove that the weight of the ice could flip the planet over. I'm not on board with this because that's not what anybody records, but these guys are from an earlier time, 70s, 60s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s as well. The ice age is alive and well for these people, and these people have a hard time letting it go because they grow up with it, right? They only know the ice age, and if all of their teachers have ever told them that the ice age is real, they have no reason to disbelieve it. So they don't let it go. And you see that a lot in some really good scholarship. But when it comes to the Ice Age, man, it's just totally detrimental to these people's studies. It's horrible. Anyway, okay, let's keep moving on with this. Moving on. Warlow, of course, had more than just ice ages in mind. Perhaps more than anything, he wanted to account for Velikovsky's additional postulate that Earth had reversed its rotational orientation, with what was east becoming west, more than once in the past. This would account for various ancient statements from around the world which claimed that in past ages the sun had changed direction, rising in the west and setting in the east, on more than one occasion. Velikovsky had of course accounted for this through an inversion of our globe. But while a simple inversion would interchange north with south, east and west would not appear to have reversed for anyone stationed upon the earth. That's actually very important, and I don't know if Velikovsky meant to say it that plainly. In his books, he does not go into incredible detail on every little thing he talks about, because if he did, he would literally be writing encyclopedias of scientific knowledge. And he even kind of says that in some of his stuff. So I don't know if Velikovsky even meant that. I'm not trying to straight up defend, ride Velikovsky here. I'm just saying that he, Dwardu might be oversimplifying Velikovsky. Anyway. But it's a good point. You can't just have the Earth flip over, though, because east and west would remain the same. That's actually a very important perspective, so something else needs to happen. All right, so let's go on. As Michael Reed succinctly explained, once one becomes familiar with seeing the sun rise at a particular point on the horizon, while also used to calling that direction east, one shall not observe anything so very markedly different if the world should turn upside down, for the sun would still appear to rise in much the same place. Granted, as Reed also clarified, the sun rising and setting would be seen to go through other minor changes. Thus, for instance, depending on one's locality on the globe, it would appear that 1. It would appear to rise 12 hours earlier or 12 hours later than before. 2. Its precise direction of rising would be slightly modified. And 3. It would appear to rise at the point on the horizon where previously it would have done 6 months later or 6 months earlier. But it would still appear to rise in the geographical east and set in the direction of the geographical west. It is therefore to Warlow's credit when we managed to turn the world upside down while also reversing east and west. The complex motions that can account for this were best explained by Warlow through the gyrations inherent in what is properly known as a tippy-top. As he rightly asserts, the tippy-top's behavior is quite intriguing. Alright, now we're starting to get into the good stuff, but what I want to remind everybody really fast, and that Dwardu doesn't really cover, is that to have the Earth turn over, you need something to do it, right? Now, don't forget, right now, we've basically established in historical catastrophism that Venus was responsible for the Earth flipping over. There was a point in time around the 1600-ish BC, and that's standard chronology. That's not real chronology. But in standard chronology, around the 1500s BC, we find Venus still trying to get into its current orbit. And while it's doing that, it's in a cometary form, right? So remember, plasma physics has Venus in basically comet mode. And everybody on Earth during this period of time sees that. And Venus comes insanely close to planet Earth multiple times. 2 times being especially destructive to our planet. And those 2 times are really where we get a lot of our mythology, whether it be biblical or, Mayan or whatever. All that stuff all over the world, a lot of that stuff comes from these encounters, including the calendar in the Mayan calendar, right? They track Venus every 52 years. Not because they were caring about it being a morning star, but because every 52 years, as corroborated by other ancient cultures, Earth had a very, very close encounter with Venus multiple times, with 2 of them being absolutely destructive. So anyway, for the Earth to flip over, you've got to have something to do it, right? And in catastrophism, so far as we can tell right now, Venus is the culprit that does the flipping. All right, let's keep moving. Back to the tippy top. All right, so the tippy top's behavior is quite intriguing. When first spun, this top spins like any other top, with its handle uppermost. But in a complex series of fast precessional, nutational, and other rotational responses, it soon inverts itself. It does so, however, in a most peculiar way. To an external observer, such a top would appear to have turned upside down while its direction of spin remains the same. But, and here's the key one, but to an observer on the spinning top, if one can visualize such, the inversion would be accompanied by a reversal of rotation. And yes, on an Earth inverted in such a manner, the sun would appear to rise in the geographical west and set in the geographical east. That's the key. That's the key. Scientifically, physics, we can prove that you can flip the planet and you can survive the flip. And I think that's one of the most important things we can say here, because the way Earth works anyways, with all of us sitting on here, we always talk about gravity, but don't forget, gravity is an electrical phenomenon, right? Gravity is, so far as we can tell, it's a dipole. It's an electric dipole. Anyway, so all of us on Earth, essentially, we're like, you can think of us as like iron filings on a magnet. Like you can have a magnet, you can throw a magnet anywhere you want. What happens to those iron filings? Nothing. The iron filings just hang out there, right? That's what's going on with Earth. That's what's going on with all of us, right? So we're nothing in the grand scheme of things, right? We're not even, we're not even basic iron filings. We're like little microscopic iron filings in that example. Anyway, so if you're ever wondering how you can have an Earth flip over or some kind of crazy stuff, but people don't go flying and centrifugal force doesn't come into play and all this other physics stuff, that's why. Because don't forget, the universe is electric, right? All those principles is what makes all of this stuff work. And that's why humans were able to basically survive the Earth flipping over. Not that the Earth flipping over has no consequences, right? There are tons of consequences to the Earth flipping over. Other shows, we've covered some of that, and we'll keep covering it in future shows. But let's keep going. I'm just focusing on the science and the possibilities of the Earth flipping over. All right, let's keep moving. As in Velikovsky's simpler model, such a tippy-top reversal of Earth would also have generated the side effects, hurricanes, tides, volcanism, etc., that we have now become quite familiar with in theories of cosmic catastrophes, with ice caps melting and refreezing in different displaced localities. Right? So So right here we have the science backing up exactly what our ancestors talk about. And when we go and we look at the geographical record, the geological record, when we go and we look at the biological record, etc., we have to explain why we have these weird mass sudden extinctions, why we have these crazy like floods and all of this stuff, why people are talking about insane hurricanes that literally just like can destroy mountains apparently. Why do people say all of this stuff happened? How can any of this be scientifically possible? Here we go. You have to have something like an inverted Earth. And sure enough, it's not just a flight of fancy. You can indeed invert Earth so long as you have the energy to do it. And humans will survive it, but they'll have to deal with the fallout. And that's exactly what our ancestors talk about, right? I mean, that's all of catastrophism, all of this crazy stuff going on. It never ceases to amaze me because we have so much evidence that catastrophism is real, but it is completely ignored by the mainstream. All right, yes, moving on. Okay, so he goes on to say, one other conundrum that Warlow's model sought to explain was the series of past reversals of Earth's geomagnetic field. Various theories had been proposed to account for these reversals. Warlow's solution seemed the simplest. As he disclosed, all of the efforts by conventional scientists to explain the magnetic reversals have concentrated on what seems to be the obvious problem, namely to find a way of reversing the field. There is, however, another possibility. That possibility is to leave the field alone and turn the Earth over instead. Now, the electromagnetic field is a very interesting topic, and it's a huge situation in catastrophism. And what Warlow just says here, that is a legitimate possibility and probably true to some extent or another at some point in time. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But we're not going to get too much into the electric field right now. We just want to know how you could possibly turn the Earth over. All right. Even so, a reversal of Earth in tippy-top fashion or otherwise would not displace the Earth's polar caps. And as we have already seen, Warlow himself calls for only a 20 or 30 degree tilt in order to account for the displaced ice caps. This is accommodated by him by claiming that Earth may not be turned over completely on each occasion, and that the amount of tilt may be a little less or a little more than 180 degrees, or there may be only a minor tilt of a few degrees. And once again, that's actually, that looks like that's true to some degree or another, once again in various points in history. So he's probably dead on the money right there. Did Warlow accept a close encounter with the planet Venus, as per Velikovsky, to account for the polar cap displacement during the Pleistocene? His research led him to believe that many large bodies have sailed by in the past. But more than that, he offered the following confession. Though I have not given consideration to the particular bodies in question, Velikovsky's investigations have led him to conclude that Venus was one of the bodies involved in recent events. Despite the ridicule with which this idea has been greeted, and fully aware that the ridicule may be leveled at me, I cannot find any reason for not accepting his conclusion. Don't you love science? When you actually just follow science, the truth pops out. I love it. Okay. Very much like the Milankovitch theory, but among a lesser group of interested parties, Warlow's model had its ups and downs. Eric Crew was among the first to show how his initial skepticism developed into firm support for Warlow's views, even though, in his opinion, the terrestrial shell would have inverted without flipping the Earth's inner core, a refinement that was also forwarded by T. William Field. This brings the theory awfully close to Hapgood's shifting crust. But this too found its critics. Even so, Crew and Field's postulate is not entirely unbelievable when it is remembered that, just prior to 1996, Evidence suggested that the Earth's solid inner core spins about 2/3 of a second per day faster than the rest of the planet, adding up to an extra rotation every 400 years. This might not be, though, of as much, but it does at least indicate that Earth's inner core is not rotationally tied to its outer surface. Earl Milton was another authority who favored Warlow's methodical solution, as so too did John White. Now, I'm going to kind of call it here because we're coming up close to 30 minutes. The last little part that I read, basically, there's other scientists that are starting to see during this period of time, and it's only more and more people have, but people are starting to come around to, you have to explain the magnetic field situation. You have to explain why our cultures in the ancient past all talked about the Earth flipping over. When you actually start to look at the evidence, suddenly there's viable physics behind it. There is viable cosmology behind all of this. Now, one other thing worth mentioning as we start to talk about other people coming around to agreeing with the possibility that the Earth may have flipped over at some point in time, some of these people, they still buy into the tectonic theory, the tectonic plate theory, all of that stuff. So don't forget, right now we have no actual proof that plate tectonics is a fact. There's a reason why it's called a theory, and there are so many problems with plate tectonic theory that it's not worth factoring into any of your real science. So a lot of these old timers, they still do all of that. They still believe that plates are floating on magma. It's like, okay, whatever. It's not really, we're not too focused on that right now. But as you start to go on with your planetary sciences, and as you start to look at ancient cultures and how they were dealing with what they were dealing with back in the day, try to not always put everything into the plate tectonic situation. Hapgood made that mistake, in my opinion, is that because he built a whole theory on, just basically the Earth's crust moved around on that floating magma, or they just, it just shifted around on the magma, right? And then the center of the Earth basically stayed the same. In my opinion, that's a huge mistake. We have no reason to believe that the Earth is floating on magma, right? The electric universe theory and plasma physics really kind of starts to explain a lot of the stuff that we see with respects to how our planet acts, to how our planet, is formed, etc. I'm not going to get into all that. I just wanted to point out that don't forget that while we're studying something like the Earth flipping over, don't hold plate tectonics as like this gold standard scientific truth. It's not. Just like the Ice Age theory, right? The Ice Age theory, which basically has already been disproved through and through. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that the Ice Age is even accepted at all, dude. It's hilarious. It's like the most unscientific principle on the planet. Anyway, don't factor that in either. Those are going to be probably two of the harder things to get rid of as you guys start to study this stuff. I'm not saying give it up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying keep your mind open to other real sciences. Just because you've been told something has been true your entire life, that does not make it scientifically true. So don't forget that. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. In the next video, I want to go over the cultures that actually talk about this. I keep saying that there's all these cultures that talk about, the Earth flipping over and stuff. And there's tons of them, but I didn't get into that. So this will give us a foundation to actually believe the stories. And then in the next video, we'll actually go over some of the stories.